Then had two presentations that challenge our understanding of informality, looking at villas, so-called shanty towns in Argentina. Francesca Ferlica took us to the periphery of Buenos Aires to look at the villa of Guernica, to remind us that the tactics of informal dwellers are important and impossible to ignore in the co-production of the city. In addition to this, Francesca emphasized that the concepts that we use matter, referring to squatting movements as land invasions versus, for example, land reappropriation is an issue of power. On a similar note, Rafael Beyer presented the case of Rambna, Casablanca's largest so-called slum, and forced us to reflect on the assumptions that we have of how slums look like and the prejudices and stigma attached to them. Building on Jennifer Robinson's Ordinary Cities, Rafael proposed seeing slums as ordinary neighborhoods in order to avoid exotifying and essentializing them, and instead being able to see them without the lens of otherness. A third presenter that talked about informality was Esther Yeboah Danso Wiredu, who took us to the streets of Accra and the Old Fadama slum, a place where 135,000 people, mostly migrants, live. With rich ethnographic work, Esther showed us the intersections of informal governance and neoliberalism, and through the example of the Ghana Federation of the Urban Poor, gave hints into the global dimensions of organizing. A fourth presentation that shook our understanding of concepts was Heini Emilia Sari's case of the Finnish Tajama, settlements that are neither city nor countryside. Through a study of architectural competitions, Heini Emilia showed us how understandings of urbanity and selective narratives of history, in other words, which history matters, end up shaping urbanization processes. A second important point that Heini Emilia raised was how the study of peripheries in the global north can help us destabilize notions of a homogeneous Western modernity. So in short, all four presentations raised three important questions. What constitutes a periphery? How do we pluralize the study of so-called informality? And lastly, how do we differentiate and investigate without bringing with us the sometimes heavy luggage embedded in pre-given categories? Lorena, over to you.
And in the afternoon, so after such a rich morning, we kicked off with a hit and run provocation from Professor Simon, who looked at what he calls extensions as a contemporary dislocation of the urban. These extensions challenged the city as a locus of modernity, highlighting new interplays that cannot be understood through the lens of the neoliberal only. Rather, they represent a collective of inoperable relations, as Professor calls them, that our conceptualizations have not yet been able to catch up with. After such thought-provoking presentation, we go to Belo Horizonte with Clarissa Campos, who draws her research on squatting in the city. She looks at the under-researched movement of squatters from the city center towards the periphery to discuss the need to critically apply how the concept of centrality, as discussed by Lefebvre, is to be done in such a context. We then travel to international Malmö with Lale Farafofar, our second presenter, who invites us to understand the conflicts and negotiations that happen on the everyday life. She presents some of the spatial, temporal, and off-the-map practices from below, and the conflicts that raise with the politics of entrepreneurship in NGBG, a street which is intended to undergo a large improvement project. We finished the afternoon with Thomas Betchard, who takes us to the developmentalist Ethiopia. In his presentation, he discusses the social material experiences and the conflictive realities at the intersection of global flows. To do so, he explores the territorial urban transformations through the analytical lens of transportation infrastructure and logistics, locating friction in terrains and disruption in logistic flows as a constitutive element of the spatial production of the urban. After such a rich day, I can only thank all presenters, Heini Emilia, Francesca, Esther, Rafael, Clarissa, Lali, and Thomas, our chairs, Patient Mususa and Hoya Tran, and our discussants, Professor Anya Nygren and Professor Abdul Malik Simon, for the day. I think we leave now inspired and curious for tomorrow when the discussions on places off the map continues. So Claudia will give now a quick overview of how the day will go about tomorrow.